We are comparing 4 agents over here: halothane, isoflurane, desflurane, and sevoflurane. Okay, and we'll do the full pharmacodynamics in a tabular format. So the first we'll take the cardiovascular system. Okay, so the first property that we are going to see is myocardial contractility. Anybody wants to guess what's going to happen? It is decreasing with halothane, decreasing with actually all. Okay, it decreases with all the myocardial contractility. Now, why is this occurring? Because these volatile agents will inhibit the calcium channels on the myocardium. Therefore, intracellular calcium concentration will be less, and therefore the cardiac contraction and the contractility of the myocardium will be reduced. Simple. Now we will see the second property. Okay. What about the systemic? Can I write systemic vascular resistance as SVR? Okay, it's easy to understand. So systemic vascular resistance. Any guesses? Will decrease, DES will decrease, CO will decrease. All of these will decrease the systemic vascular resistance, except halothane has got no effect. Dash. Halothane has got no effect on the systemic vascular resistance. Okay. Now we'll understand the BP, the mean arterial BP. So any guesses? It's going to be decreased in all of this. Why leaving halothane? It's decreasing in everyone, but the mechanism is different. So now pay attention. The decrease in the ISO, SIBO, and DES, the BP is falling in these three because of this problem, because of decrease in the systemic vascular resistance. Okay. So the decrease in the systemic vascular resistance is the main cause because of which the BP is falling. Okay. The BP is falling in halothane. Why? Because of decrease in the contractility of the heart, as I told you. So that is one important cause, decrease in the myocardial contractility. Okay. And now we'll see next, there's a decrease in the cardiac output. So this is the reason why the BP falls in halothane. BP falls everywhere, but you should know the reason for each. Now let's see about the heart rate. What's going to happen to the heart rate? The heart rate will increase. Okay. The heart rate will increase and it will be unchanged with halothane. So I'm putting a dash for unchanged. Okay. So the heart rate will increase with ISO and DES even with low MAC concentrations. Whereas sevoflurane, this increase which is occurring will occur only when the MAC exceeds more than 1.5. Okay. At a MAC value, lower MAC values, no, sevoflurane will not increase the heart rate. Okay. Whereas these two, ISO and DES, even at low MAC values, they will increase the heart rate. All right. Now, next, what about the stroke volume and cardiac output? Going to be decreased in halothane. Okay. But it is unchanged in all three. Okay. The cardiac output is unchanged in all three. Now, what about the RA pressure? What I mean by RA pressure? What will be your CBP readings like? Will they be increasing or will they be decreasing? So the CVP readings will be increasing in these and it will be unchanged in the sevoflurane. No effect with any of them except which one? Which is not written over here. It increases with nitrous. Remember pulmonary hypertension and nitrous, can we use it? No. Okay. So, pulmonary vascular resistance is not affected. It won't increase the pulmonary artery pressures and all. Okay. Now, next. Arrhythmias. So, arrhythmias, which of these can cause an arrhythmia, which cannot? Good. So, halothane amongst all of them have got the maximum potential for causing arrhythmias. Okay. And this has got no potential to cause arrhythmias. Okay. So halothane can induce arrhythmia at very low doses of adrenaline. Okay. So in case you'll end up giving adrenaline to that patient, even very minuscule doses of adrenaline, if administered to that patient who is receiving general anesthesia with halothane, he might end up getting arrhythmias. Okay. Now we need to understand about cardioprotective property. Okay. So all of these actually, if you go to see, they all have got some amount of cardioprotective property, right? Somewhere they are reducing the mean BP, somewhere they are, they are having a decrease in the systemic vascular resistance, decrease in the myocardial contractility, most important. Decrease in the myocardial contractility, which means what the work done by the heart is actually reduced, right? So it reduces the workload of the heart, right? So therefore, all of these have got some cardioprotective property. Now you need to know something that is known as ischemic preconditioning. There is a property known as ischemic preconditioning. So what do you understand? There is some ischemia and there is something known as some preconditioning. You're preconditioning the heart for an ischemia. You're preconditioning it. You're preparing it. You're making the heart ready that in case an ischemia happens, the heart is protected. So what is ischemic preconditioning? Ischemic preconditioning says that if the heart is subjected to a very short period of ischemia, then this heart, this myocardial tissue, when it is subjected to a subsequent longer duration of ischemia, it will not undergo like necrosis, okay? It will not undergo any dysfunction. So that is the property of ischemic preconditioning. And why am I telling you about ischemic preconditioning? Because we need to know something known as anesthetic preconditioning. Okay. So this ISO, DES and CIVO, they have a property of anesthetic preconditioning. So what is ischemic preconditioning? We have to understand, and how anesthetic preconditioning and this is interrelated with each other. Okay. If you don't remember all the steps thoroughly, it's okay because it's all happening at the cellular level. But I will just run you through them once. So ischemic preconditioning is mediated by adenosine. Okay. So now what had happened? Adenosine is released. It goes and binds to its receptor, adenosine receptor. This causes increase in the protein kinase C. Okay. Now what will happen? This increase in protein kinase C will cause the phosphorylation of the ATP-dependent potassium ion channels on the myocardium. Okay. This activity of the ATP-dependent potassium channel on the myocardium is activity is increased. Okay. Followed by which there will be decrease in the intracellular calcium. Okay. So if intracellular calcium is less, means what? The cardiac action potential will become very short. Okay. And therefore, this is a negative inotropic effect and it will protect the heart, okay, from any hypoxia or ischemia. All right. So in short, if you don't remember all these steps, don't worry, it's okay. Just remember that ischemic preconditioning, it is mediated by adenosine, okay, ultimately leading to what? Remember this term, the ATP-dependent potassium channels on the heart. Remember this, ATP-dependent potassium channels on the heart, they get stimulated. Just remember that, okay? And because of this, the heart is protected from any kind of ischemia. Just remember this superficially, it's enough. Now, why am I telling you that you should remember these ATP-dependent potassium channel, this term? Because the anesthetic agents which we are using, ISO, DES and CIVO, I told you that they have got anesthetic preconditioning. They are protective to the heart. All right. Why are they protective to the heart? Because these agents also go and open up the ATP-dependent potassium channels. These agents also go and open the ATP-dependent potassium channels on the heart, ultimately leading to what? A phenomenon which is similar, which is occurring when ischemic preconditioning is happening, right? So now this is cardioprotective, okay? And therefore now we are calling this as anesthetic preconditioning. So is this understood why we need to understand ischemic preconditioning and how our anesthetic agents are manifesting a similar response in the heart and therefore they are cardioprotective, and this is known as anesthetic preconditioning. So now we will understand the respiratory system. Okay. So the first thing that we need to understand is bronchodilation or bronchomotor tone. Chalo, any guesses? All relax the bronchial smooth muscles. All are bronchodilators. Okay. The second thing, mucociliary clearance. The capacity of there are cilia, right? The ciliary beat which is occurring in the bronchi, right? So what's going to happen? The cilia beat, the secretion, clearance of the secretions. Is it going to be impaired or not impaired? The ability for mucociliary clearance to occur is decreased because the beating of the cilia, right? The cilia beating outwards to remove all the secretions out, right? So the ciliary beat is going to be affected by all of them. Okay, so mucociliary clearance is reduced. Now, what is going to happen to the response, the ventilatory response to the PaCO2? Once is depressed, the ventilatory response to CO2, increase in the CO2 is depressed. What about the ventilatory response to the PaO2? If the PaO2 falls, hypoxia occurs, what's going to happen? Decreased, okay? All of them will decrease the ventilatory response. So till now you can see all of them are occurring uniformity, okay? No variation. And then the pattern of breathing. So what's going to happen? All of these will cause dose dependent decrease in the respiratory rate. All of them, okay? There's a dose dependent decrease in the respiratory rate. There is also a decrease in the tidal volume, all of them. Okay, in the net effect, what will happen? There is going to be a rapid, shallow breathing. This is going to be seen, this kind of rapid, shallow breathing pattern will be seen with all the agents. So far is the respiratory system is done. And the central nervous system. So the first thing that we need to understand is about cerebral blood flow and ICP. So can anybody tell me what's going to happen to the cerebral blood flow and the intracranial pressure? Actually, all of them cause it. All of them will cause cerebral vasodilation, increase the cerebral blood flow, and cause increase in the intracranial pressure. Okay. So now this, if you can think of the applied, if any neurosurgery is going on and when the surgeon tells you the brain is tight, his operating field is tight, which means what? He's not, there is some amount of increase, the cerebral blood flow has increased is one of the things you can suspect. All right, when the surgeon tells you that. So what do? Many people prefer to keep TIVA going on, intravenous anesthesia going on. So they attach a propofol infusion also because this is not known to cause an increase in the cerebral blood flow and ICP. Whereas all of these agents are known to cause that. Now, what are evoked potentials? So evoked potential means what? If I'm giving a stimulus, there should be some EEG recording. That is evoked potentials, nothing difficult. So there are auditory evoked potentials means what? I will give some sound stimulus and I will see some EEG reading. Visual, I will give some visual stimulus and I will see EEG reading. Okay. Then there is somatosensory evoked potentials. Okay, you give some touch and some stimulus, all right, which will be sensed, then it goes evoked potentials and the EEG. So what will happen over here? All the evoked potentials will decrease. Now understand the applied of this. Okay. So when the surgeon does surgery, when he wants to do somatosensory evoked potentials, the surgeon will tell you in advance that I want to do neuromonitoring during the surgery when I'm operating. So what he will tell you, I'm going to do somatosensory evoked potentials. Okay. So this means what? There will be some kind of sensory stimulus which will be given to the patient, which will reach the brain, and then you would expect to see some EEG changes. So a neurophysician, okay, is called in to do all this monitoring, okay, while the surgery is going on. Okay. So there are electrodes placed, mapping is done on the whole system. So that mapping will not happen well if you are giving these agents. All right. Now again comes the role of giving intravenous propofol infusion during such surgeries and keeping absolutely no inhalation agent. Because if you give inhalation agents, you will not get correct evoked potentials. If the evoked potential doesn't come correctly, the surgeon will feel that that particular area of the brain is not responding. Whereas it might be attributed to your inhalation agent. Hence, when such monitoring is done during a neurosurgery, you do not have to give inhalation agent. And the case is maintained on infusion. Okay, so you have to know about seizure potential. Which of these are capable of inducing seizures and which are not? Sevoflurane, SS. Okay, sevoflurane, I'll just put a yes over here. So sevoflurane is having a seizure potential. All right, and rest of them, no seizure potential. Okay, Another agent which has got a seizure potential is enflurane. Enflurane also has got a property of inducing seizures in a patient. Okay, so remember these two agents, enflurane, sevoflurane can cause seizures, whereas all these other agents are not responsible for causing seizures. All right. Next is CMRO2, cerebral metabolic oxygen requirement. So basically, I'm trying to tell you about the cerebral metabolism and the overall oxygen requirement. So will this increase or will it decrease? The cerebral metabolism will decrease. As the depth of anesthesia is increased, the metabolism will reduce, oxygen requirement will reduce for all of them. Standard. Okay. Next, what about the CSF? CSF production. Can these agents affect it? The CSF production? None of them affect. Okay. None of these affect it. But again, here we have enflurane. Enflurane causes increase in the CSF volume. Okay. So it causes increase in the CSF volume, and that is why it's one of the reasons it can cause seizures. Okay. So it increases the CSF production and decreases the absorption. So overall, the volume of CSF is increased when you use enflurane. Hepatic blood flow. Anybody wants to tell me? So isoflurane, desflurane, and sevoflurane will increase the hepatic blood flow. Halothane will decrease it. Halothane decreases the liver blood flow. Okay. Now hepatic drug clearance. What about the hepatic? So hepatic drug clearance, please, I'm not talking about these drugs. I'm talking about intravenous drugs. So how does the liver clear the drugs? With the help of its enzymes, right? It's got like so many enzymes to metabolize the drugs. So I'm asking you, will the enzyme activity of the liver decrease? And will the drug clearance decrease with any of these drugs? Yes, it will.
Halothane.
All of them. Hepatic drug clearance, I mean to say it will decrease. Let's just put it like this. So the hepatic drug clearance will decrease because these agents inhibit liver enzymes. It is occurring because of inhibition of the liver enzymes that are involved in the metabolism of drugs. So overall, the drugs take more time to metabolize and get excreted. All right. Now, next important, very important, hepatotoxicity.
Halothane is hepatotoxic.
Yes. Halothane is hepatotoxic. All right. But I will also tell you that iso and des have got some amount of hepatotoxic potential. Okay. So now this is, but hepatotoxicity is maximum with halothane. Okay. So now we'll understand halothane hepatitis and the general hepatotoxicity. Okay. So there are two things which happen because of using halothane. Okay. Let's just leave this here. So there is one in 20% of the patient, okay, who receive halothane, the normal 20% adults, the hepatitis, the hepatotoxicity is very mild. Okay. It is self-limiting, which means what? It will not go to a fulminant state. Okay. And it occurs in the post-op period. Post-op hepatotoxicity. This is the property which is seen with 20% of adult patients who are receiving halothane. Okay. So what will be their clinical features? What will they have? They will have lethargy. They will have nausea. Okay. They will have fever. And they will have some amount of increase in the SGOT and PT. Okay. There will be some amount of increase in the SGOT PT. Okay. So this is a very common type. And why does this halothane cause this in 20%? 20% is not a small amount. Of 1/5 of the patient, out of 5 patients, every 1 patient will have this. Okay. And it will be self-limiting. You don't have to worry much. All right. So why is this occurring? This is occurring because of this thing. Because of this. Because of decrease in the hepatic blood flow. So what is the reason? The decrease in the hepatic blood flow. So what will happen if hepatic blood flow is less? Therefore, there is going to be decrease in the hepatic oxygen delivery. Correct? So this is the reason why this 20% of the patients are showing some amount of post-op hepatotoxicity. Okay. Now there is a rare type. Okay. There is another rare, which we known as halothane hepatitis. Okay. So what is halothane hepatitis? As I told you, it's a very rare condition. It is happening in 1 in 10,000 patients to 1 in 30,000 patients. So you can see the incidence. This is occurring 1 in 5 patients. This is occurring 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 30,000 patients. And how does this manifest? Okay. So there is going to be a massive hepatic necrosis. So it's hepatic necrosis. So it's a very fulminant condition. Okay. It's a really bad situation that the patient enters. Okay. And what are going to be the clinical features of this patient? Before that, we should understand why it is occurring. What is the reason for this? So we'll understand the reason first. What is the reason behind this occurring? We know the reason behind this was decrease in hepatic blood flow and decrease in the oxygen delivery. The reason behind this is it is immune mediated. It is immune mediated hepatotoxicity, which means what? There is some immune reaction, there's some antigen antibody response occurring, which is going and destroying the liver. Okay. And what are the clinical features that you will see in this patient? Okay. So there will be eosinophilia. We know that eosinophils increase in a condition of allergic state, right? In an allergic response, right? Then we'll have arthralgia. Okay. Then there is going to be rashes. Okay. So this you will see clinically. Okay. So who are at risk? Who is at the population? Which is the population who is at risk for having this halothane hepatitis? So there are these females, female gender, middle-aged people, and obese people. Okay. And people who have got multiple exposure to halothane. This happened, you have understood the clinical features, right? Because of this halothane hepatitis, which is occurring in 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 30,000 of people. Which are these people? These people are either females, or they're fat people, or they're people with past history of exposure to halothane, or they're obese people who are prone for this. Okay. This is occurring by a mechanism which is totally different from the routine post-op hepatotoxicity. So this is occurring because of some immune-mediated condition. All right. And so what is the immune-mediated condition that is happening? We'll understand that. Okay, so these patients, there's an increase in the IgG. If you will see halothane hepatitis, there is increase in the IgG. In the halothane hepatitis, there's increase in the immunoglobulin G that will be seen. Okay, so what immunoglobulin G is what? It is an antibody, right? This antibody is going to be directed against who? Against the liver hepatocyte proteins. Okay. So there are proteins, there are microsomal proteins which are present on the hepatocytes. All right. They are undergoing some conformational change. So now these protein structures which were there, which were previously known as self, it was a part of our body. Now the protein structure only has changed. Okay. And it has gotten changed its structure. And now this has become a neo-antigen. It's become a new antigen. Okay. So what will the body do? It will say, oh my God, some structural changes happened over here. It will sense it as an antigen, and then there's an antibody response which will occur, increase in the IgGs, and then antibodies will go and destroy the liver. All right. So why is that this hepatocyte protein is getting changed in its morphology? So this is happening because halothane undergoes metabolism. All right. So this halothane metabolism will give you something known as some halide derivatives, halide metabolites. Okay, so the actual name is trifluoroacetyl halide metabolite. So this trifluoroacetyl halide metabolite will go on the hepatocyte, cause a structural change in the proteins. Those proteins are now become new antigens, and now antibody response is mediated against them, and IgG titers are increased, and therefore there's a fulminant, hepatic necrosis which has occurred. Okay, now I told you that isoflurane and desflurane have also got some chance of this problem. Why? Because some amount of isoflurane, some amount of desflurane does undergo metabolism in the liver. Halothane, we all know it definitely undergoes metabolism in the liver, but iso and des also, all right, but a very less extent, very less. Okay, so the amount of this halide metabolite, the same mechanism, but the amount of this metabolite that is produced, it is very less. So it has a propensity to cause hepatotoxicity, but the incidence is very, very low. Okay. Now coming to sevoflurane. So sevoflurane does not get metabolized in the liver. It does not produce any halide derivatives. Okay. But there is a problem. What is the problem? That there could be formation of compound A, the kidney. So the first thing I'm going to ask you about is renal blood flow, glomerular filtration, and urine output. Renal blood flow, GFR, and urine output. So how are these going to affect it? So all of them will decrease the renal blood flow, therefore decrease the GFR, therefore decrease the urine output. All of them. How can you avoid this? If you will hydrate the patient well preoperatively. Okay. Next point we need to understand is fluoride-induced nephrotoxicity, known as fluoride-induced nephrotoxicity. All right. So what is the clinical features of the patient who is having this? So the kidney has lost its concentrating ability. All right. So there will be dilute urine. There will be polyuria. Because kidney cannot concentrate, there is going to be hypernatremia. There is going to be hyperosmolarity. Okay. And there's going to be increase in the creat. Now you will tell me which patients are going to be prone. So it was first seen. This problem was first seen with methoxyflurane. All right. They first found this problem with methoxyflurane. Now, why this problem occurred? Because there's lots of fluoride which is produced in the body when you gave methoxyflurane. All right. And this plasma level of fluoride increased. Okay. Therefore, causing toxicity. So, how much plasma? Fluoride. So, what they saw that 50 to 80 micromole per liter and more than 80 micromole per liter. So 50 to 80 micromole per liter of plasma fluoride concentration caused subclinical toxicity. Okay. And more than 80, when it exceeded the fluoride concentration, it causes clinical toxicity. Okay, it causes clinical toxicity. Now, all the volatile agents. So now, as you know, our scientists never stopped, right? I mean, they kept on introducing new agents. So after methoxyflurane, there were many other agents which were induced, which were brought into practice, like isoflurane, desflurane, sevoflurane, halothane, all of these. Okay, so all of these, what they saw, that these undergo significantly less metabolism in the body, right? Iso, des, and sevo primarily are what? Very minimal metabolism in the body. Maximum is removed from the body through the lungs, right? By exhalation out. Very less undergoes metabolism except halothane, which goes to the liver and gets metabolized in a significant amount. All right. So what they realized, all these newer agents which were there, they produced less fluoride. That is one point. Okay. The second point, what they realized is that in sevoflurane, sevoflurane was producing, when they gave sevoflurane, the plasma fluoride levels, they exceeded 50. They exceeded 50, but it never produced any renal toxicity. So they were like, why renal toxicity is not occurring in the patient after giving sevoflurane, although plasma fluoride is going more than 50. So then they realized, what is the point? The point is that where is the fluoride produced? Where in the body? Is it produced in the liver or is it produced in the kidneys? So that's what they realized, that methoxyflurane was primarily producing the fluoride in the kidneys and therefore damaged the kidney so much. All right. Whereas this sevoflurane, the production of fluoride was maximally happening in the liver. So they realized that this production in the liver causes lesser toxicity. There is, like, in fact, no toxicity occurring. Okay. So where the production of fluoride is occurring, that is important. Is that understood? If we use isoflurane, desflurane, sevoflurane for a patient with CKD, Chronic kidney disease diagnosed patient, you can definitely go ahead with these, any of them, no problem. Then you will tell me, Ari, what about compound A? So now we come to something known as vinyl halide nephrotoxicity. There's something known as vinyl halide nephrotoxicity. So now you know that the CO2 absorbent, which is the KOH, so potassium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, right? So they react, they have a property that they might react with sevoflurane. So now I'm talking about sevoflurane here. Okay, so they have these carbon dioxide absorbents can react with sevoflurane and it causes the breakdown. Okay, there are some breakdown products. Those breakdown products are trifluorovinyl, methyl vinyl ether. Methyl vinyl ether, which is compound A. What we all known as compound A. If you don't remember this, okay, trifluoromethylvinyl ether is produced when the carbon dioxide absorbent will react with sevoflurane. Okay, and this is known as vinyl halide nephrotoxicity or nephrotoxicity, which will happen because of compound A. Okay, so what they saw that compound A, when it was increasing when they were giving it to the rats, no, they saw that it was causing proximal renal tubular, injury. All right, in the rats, and they noticed that it is crossing more than 20 ppm in the rats. Okay, so what they saw in humans that when they used the closed circuit for GA with sevoflurane and the surgery was going even for more than 5 hours duration, the compound A that was found was less than 20 ppm. Okay, so therefore there was no renal dysfunction occurring. All right, they found out that the carbon dioxide absorbent also has a role. So the older carbon dioxide absorbent, which is baraline had got nephrotoxicity used to be seen with compound A. It had more incidence of causing nephrotoxicity with compound A. All right. So what I mean to say by 20 ppm, so 20 ppm in the anesthesia bleeding circuit, okay, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so is this okay, vinyl halide? Skeletal muscles, all right. So all our anesthetic agents have a property to relax the skeletal muscles. As we saw, MAC definition only meant that, right? So it goes and causes partially blocks the acetylcholine receptors at the neuromuscular junction, and it causes some amount of skeletal muscle relaxation. Okay. All our anesthetic agents have a potential to cause malignant hyperthermia in patients who are, susceptible to it. Okay. Maximum incidence of malignant hyperthermia can occur with halothane. All right. Now, uterine, the effect on the uterus. So we all know it is responsible for causing uterine atony, right? So therefore, when we have to do manual removal of placenta, we prefer to give GA because it causes uterine relaxation and the placenta can be removed manually, right? During a LSCS surgery, if you keep a very high MAC value, it will cause uterine atony, uterine relaxation, uterus will not contract and cause severe bleeding. All right. So it decreases the uterine contractility. Okay, it does cross the placenta, it does reach the baby, but once the baby is out and the baby starts breathing, whatever amount of anesthetic agent is there, it will all be expired out by the baby. All right. So this is it with inhalation agents. Everything is done. So all okay.